They all thought Mr. Kwame was dying, a once powerful man now reduced to a silent figure lying on a straw mat in his old village home. The news spread fast, calling back children who hadn't visited in years and nieces and nephews who once depended on his generosity. But what none of them knew was that the illness was a lie, a carefully laid trap. After building an empire from scratch and watching his family grow distant and greedy, Mr. Kwame wanted to know one thing. If he had nothing left, would they still care? What followed was a heartbreaking reveal of true intentions, forgotten kindness, and an old man's final lesson in love, loyalty, and legacy. This is not just a story, it's a mirror. And once you look into it, you might ask yourself, would I pass the test? The sun had barely risen when Mr. Kwame stepped out of the old dusty car that dropped him at the edge of the village. His once pristine suit hung loosely over his shoulders, and a plain walking stick replaced the polished cane he used to carry. He looked nothing like the sharp, commanding figure who once sat at the head of high-powered boardrooms. Now, his gait was slow, his eyes quiet, and his presence barely caused a stir. Only Desmond, his longtime driver and closest confidant, knew the truth. Mr. Kwame was not sick, he was tired. Tired of being surrounded by people who only smiled when his wallet was full. After decades in the city building wealth businesses and a name that commanded respect, he had seen his family grow more distant, only reaching out when they needed something. So he came back to where it all began, not as a billionaire, but as a frail old man in need. He moved into his late mother's clay-walled house, a place long abandoned by modern comforts. Word quickly spread through the village. Mr. Kwame is back and he's not well. Neighbors whispered at the market stalls, and distant relatives passed the message through calls and texts. But none of them knew that every cough, every wince, and every limp was part of a plan to answer one painful question. If the riches were gone, would the love remain? Desmond adjusted his cap and stood silently by the window, watching as chickens pecked around the compound. Inside, Mr. Kwame lay wrapped in a faded wrapper, his eyes half shut as if sleep could hide his heavy thoughts. That morning, Desmond had sent messages to all of Mr. Kwame's close family, his 3 children, 2 nephews, and his late sister's daughter, asking them to come urgently. He didn't mention money or inheritance, just that their father and uncle had returned home and was gravely ill. Within hours, replies came in. Some were short, some indifferent, and only one from his daughter Nia asked how he was feeling. Desmond didn't comment. He just watched. The house was bare. No flat screen TVs, no marble floors, no polished gold. Just the smell of old wood. A simple mat on the floor and silence thick enough to stir guilt. Mr. Kwame didn't speak much. He wanted them to come and see him as he was. Weak, quiet, forgotten. Not the man with estates and foreign accounts, but the father who once sacrificed everything. As the village breeze blew through the cracked shutters, Desmond looked at the man he had served for 30 years. He knew this was not just a test of family, it was a final call for truth. And soon, one by one, they would begin to arrive. The following afternoon, a cloud of dust rose on the village road as a sleek black SUV rolled in, its polished rims catching the sunlight like mirrors. Out stepped Dwayne, Mr. Kwame's eldest son, dressed in a designer shirt and gold wristwatch, his cologne announcing his presence before he even knocked. Desmond opened the door, but Dwayne barely nodded. His eyes scanned the humble home with thinly veiled disgust. He walked in, looked around and muttered, "So this is where he's been hiding." Mr. Kwame stared on the mat, his face pale, voice raspy. "Dwayne, you came." The greeting was met with a forced smile, the kind that barely touched the eyes. "Of course, Papa. We heard you weren't well." But it didn't take long before Dwayne's true purpose revealed itself. "Have you updated your will? I mean, just in case, you know. We should make sure your assets are protected." He spoke casually, even chuckling. Mr. Kwame closed his eyes, murmuring that he was tired. Dwayne didn't stay long. He left without asking if his father had eaten without touching the food Desmond had placed on the small stool nearby. As he drove off, music blasting from his car speakers, the silence he left behind spoke louder than any words. Desmond shut the door gently, but the old man didn't open his eyes. He had expected this. Still, it hurt. By the end of the week, more relatives arrived. Nia, the youngest daughter, came in quiet and hesitant, carrying a small bag of groceries. Then came Marcos and Junior, nephews who once lived under Mr. Kwame's roof when they had nothing. And finally, Zara, his niece, polished, elegant, and always glued to her phone. But with each arrival, the warmth Mr. Kwame hoped for never came. They greeted him with distant smiles, shifting uncomfortably in the sparse room. Nia tried to help Desmond prepare tea, but Zara rolled her eyes and complained about the dust. Junior paced the yard on calls, loudly asking contacts to check if Uncle's land titles are secure. Marcos wandered into the back room and asked Desmond how much the house could sell for if renovated. None of them asked what medicine he needed. None brought a blanket, nor did they sit beside him just to talk. They gathered at night, murmuring among themselves about properties and documents. Mr. Kwame, lying motionless under his wrapper, listened to every word. He wasn't angry, just deeply weary. These were the people he once fed, clothed, and educated. Now, they couldn't even share a quiet moment of care. Desmond noticed it too, but he said nothing. The test was working. One by one, they were showing their true hearts. And the old house, stripped of comforts, became a mirror for their souls. Not everyone came for gain. One morning, just as the cock crowed and the compound lay silent, the gate creaked open slowly. In stepped an elderly woman wrapped in a faded blue wrapper, her silver hair tied back beneath a simple headscarf. She leaned on a crooked walking stick and carried a calabash bowl in one hand. Desmond recognized her instantly. Mama Abena, the woman who once cared for Mr. Kwame when he was just a boy with scraped knees and big dreams. She hadn't changed much. Her steps were slower, her back more bent, but her heart still full. She entered the house quietly, setting the bowl down beside Mr. Kwame's mat. I heard you were sick, she said softly, sitting without waiting to be invited. So I made you your favorite, millet porridge, with a little honey. The scent drifted through the room, warm and comforting. Mr. Kwame opened his eyes slowly, and for the first time in days, he smiled. It wasn't just the porridge. It was the memory of being seen, remembered, and loved without condition. She stayed for hours, wiping his brow, whispering old proverbs, even scolding him gently for not writing all these years. Money makes people forget, she said, but a kind heart always remembers. When she finally rose to leave, she didn't ask for anything, not even a thank you. She just touched his shoulder, nodded at Desmond, and walked out as quietly as she came. But the warmth she left behind lingered long after. That night, the house held an eerie silence. Crickets hummed outside, and a faint wind slipped through the cracked wooden shutters. Mr. Kwame lay still, his breathing soft and measured. From the corridor came muffled voices, Marcos and Junior standing close, speaking in low tones. Desmond, seated outside near the doorway, heard every word. We need to move fast, Marcos said. If he dies suddenly, we won't know what's what. That driver can't be trusted. Junior replied, there's that land near the junction, the one he never developed. I already spoke to someone who's interested. If we act before the will is changed, we can flip it for cash. Desmond clenched his jaw, but stayed silent. Inside, Mr. Kwame's eyes remained shut, but tears slowly traced the corners. They had no idea he was awake. No idea that their greed was no longer hidden behind fake smiles. The betrayal stung deeper than illness ever could. These boys, once fed from his table, clothed with his savings, guided through school, were now circling like vultures. That night, Mr. Kwame said nothing. But in his silence, something inside him hardened. The test had gone far enough. He had seen what he needed to see, and in the morning, everything would begin to change. The next morning arrived with a heavy sky. Clouds hung low, as if nature itself braced for a reckoning. Inside the house, Desmond stood beside the cooking pot, stirring slowly. The usual murmurs of relatives had not yet filled the compound, but they would soon. Mr. Kwame sat up quietly on his mat. There was no cough this time, no groaning or clutching of his chest. He sat tall, back straight, eyes clear. "It's time," he said simply. Desmond nodded. He helped the old man into his crisp, white native wear, the one he had hidden in a suitcase beneath the bed. As he stepped into the sitting room, the first gasp came from Nia, who had just walked in with a plastic bag of fruit. "Papa?" she whispered. "You're standing?" Within minutes, the others arrived, one after another, confused, startled, speechless. Mr. Kwame stood in the center of the room like a judge in his own courtroom. He looked each of them in the eye, his voice calm but steady. "You thought I was dying," he said. "And perhaps, in a way, I was. Dying of heartbreak. Dying of the weight of seeing what you've all become." Silence followed. Zara glanced at Junior, whose face had turned pale. Dwayne folded his arms, lips twitching with defensiveness, but no one spoke. The old man, who they thought too weak to lift a spoon, now stood like a storm that had waited its turn. And the wind was just beginning to blow. Mr. Kwame took a breath, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. Then slowly he began to speak, not shouting, not scolding, but recounting. Word for word, he repeated what he had overheard. "Marcus, you said the land by the junction could fetch quick money. Junior, you spoke of moving me to a care home. Dwayne, you came and left without even asking if I had eaten. Zara, you rolled your eyes at the dust in the house where I was born." Their faces told a story of guilt, surprise, and disbelief. Nia lowered her head, shame swimming in her eyes, but the rest shuffled uncomfortably, offering weak excuses. "We were just worried, Papa," Dwayne said. "You misunderstood," Marcus added. Mr. Kwame raised his hand. "Enough!" His voice did not shake. "You misunderstood me. You thought my silence meant weakness. You thought my love would keep covering your greed." He turned toward the corner, where Desmond stood quietly. "This man has served me for 3 decades with honesty. When I had nothing, he stayed. When I had everything, he never asked. And Mama Abena, who brought porridge without expecting anything, reminded me of what true family looks like." The room remained frozen. No one moved. No one dared to speak. For the first time in years, they were seeing not just a man, but a mirror. And what it reflected was not wealth, but the poverty of their hearts. The next morning, they gathered again, this time not out of concern, but curiosity. Whispers had spread through the village that Mr. Kwame was preparing to make an announcement. Inside the house, a single table was placed in the center of the room, a small folder resting neatly on top. Mr. Kwame entered with Desmond by his side, walking tall, no longer the shadow they had pitied. He stood before them, his voice clear. "I know why most of you came. You thought I was dying, and with death comes opportunity. You came with calculators in your hearts, not compassion." He opened the folder slowly, revealing the final copy of his will. "I once thought legacy was about blood, but I see now, legacy is built with love, with loyalty, with truth. So let me be clear. My houses, lands, and investments will not go to those who watched me suffer and stood aside." He turned toward Nia, his daughter, eyes softening. "You came. You stayed. Even when the others mocked this place, you helped Desmond sweep the compound and sat beside me without expecting anything. You, Desmond, and Mama Abena, you will carry forward what I leave behind." Gasps echoed in the room. Junior muttered under his breath. Dwayne stood up, his face flushed with disbelief. "You can't do this," he said, but Mr. Kwame only nodded. "I just did." And with that, he closed the folder. The weight of years of silence had finally shifted, and the truth had found its voice. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. The compound no longer echoed with the rustle of greedy footsteps or the scent of cheap cologne masking selfish intentions. Instead, there was laughter, soft, healing laughter, as Mama Abina returned with another bowl of porridge, scolding Mr. Kwame gently for staying up too late. Nia planted flowers around the front yard, her bare hands in the soil her father had once played in as a child. Desmond painted the front gate, humming an old tune that used to play on the car radio during long city drives. Mr. Kwame often sat under the mango tree, a journal in his lap, watching the wind sway the leaves and listening to the calm his heart hadn't known in years. One afternoon, he gathered a few village youth and told them everything, not just about money, but about the dangers of forgetting what matters. He spoke of kindness, of listening with the heart, and of remembering those who stayed when everyone else walked away. His story became a tale passed down at firesides, in classrooms, even whispered by mothers to their children at bedtime. In the end, Mr. Kwame didn't just test his family, he taught a village. And in doing so, he found something far greater than gold. He found peace.